Well, viewers, those are the headlines. Our top focus: the European Rights Court has ordered Russia to pay Georgia over 253 million euros for preventing people from crossing freely into the Georgian regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which Moscow recognized as independent after the 2008 war. Now, the European Court of Human Rights has stated that Russia had committed violations including excessive use of force, ill treatment, unlawful detention and unlawful restrictions on day-to-day movement across the administrative boundary line between Georgian-controlled territory and the Russian-backed breakaway Georgian regions as well. Although Moscow quit the European Court of Human Rights in 2022 in the wake of the war with Ukraine, the court maintains that it remains liable for any violations committed before then. With us on the broadcast is Professor Andrew Latham. He is a professor of international relations, joining us from Minneapolis. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. At the outset, I wanted to understand from you, how likely is it that Russia will comply with this ruling, considering that it is no longer a member of this court?
I think the chances are close to zero, if not zero. Russia has no incentive to abide by this ruling. As you say, it has withdrawn since 2022, and there's some dispute over whether it's liable or responsible for decisions made prior to its withdrawal. But in any case, given the political temper of the times, there really is no chance. There's no upside to Russia rolling over and accepting this judgment. And there's every upside to saying, we don't recognize your jurisdiction, ECHR, European Court of Human Rights, and we don't agree or concede that we were guilty of any misconduct in that particular war.
Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to understand, what kind of precedent then does this ruling set, considering the geopolitical dynamics of the Caucasus region?
Well, I mean, it signals quite clearly that Russia is no longer aspiring to be a deeply or truly European nation in the way that, say, Denmark is or Germany is. It has severed all sorts of ties since the onset of beginning in 2014, but certainly since 2023. And this is just another layer of icing on that particular cake, as it were, signaling once again that Russia does not recognize the authority of the ECHR, especially before 2022. I think this signals an ongoing separation of Russia from Europe.
All right, sir, requesting you to stay on with us as we're tracking further updates, this time from the United Kingdom. The UK spy agency MI5 has issued a stark warning to British lawmakers about increased espionage threats from Russia alongside China and Iran. The UK's domestic spy agency has stated that Russian intelligence operatives are actively targeting politicians through blackmail, phishing and building long-term relationships in order to gather sensitive information. British MPs have been urged to be cautious of online exploitation, travel risks and suspicious financial donations used to gain influence. MI5's alert highlights how Russia continues its long-term campaign to undermine British democracy along other hostile states. This warning comes amid ongoing concerns over foreign interference in UK politics, with MI5 referencing past cases involving covert attempts to manipulate political processes. Still with us on the broadcast is Professor Andrew Latham. Now, interestingly, it's the means that Russia is now using in order to spy on these lawmakers. We are undoubtedly in an era witnessing increased digitization. How significant then is the threat posed by state-sponsored espionage in such a landscape, and can we see this further evolving with the artificial intelligence boom as well?
Yes, I mean, this is not just a British phenomenon. The counterintelligence agency there, MI5, has put its finger on a trend which is worldwide in this era of great power competition. Some have characterized as Cold War 2.0. I think that's going too far, but it rhymes with the first Cold War, except we're now in a digital hypermedia environment where this kind of, on the part of great powers, Russia, China, regional great powers like Iran, all seek to influence consequential governments. And the UK's government is still quite consequential on the world stage, but this is also happening in Canada, the United United States, Germany, Denmark, places like that. What's new is not so much what the Russians and Chinese and Iranians are trying to accomplish, but the modalities or the means in this hypermedia environment, phishing, for example, but also simple ways of approaching members of parliament or representatives in the House of Representatives in the U.S., favorable media coverage, for example. So it's kind of hybrid warfare, but applied to the espionage world. And MI5 is quite right to point out that this is the newest face of kind of James Bond-like intelligence gathering.
Indeed, and we've also recently seen a high-profile espionage case in the United Kingdom which pertained to allegations of two men passing sensitive information to China. The case collapsed and critics have pointed fingers at the UK government, claiming that the Starmer administration, particularly NSA Jonathan Powell, played a role in this in order to keep Chinese investments in the country secure. Now, Starmer's office has insisted that the decision was made solely by the independent Crown Prosecution Service. Now, in light of this, what sort of balance should then the UK strike in, dealing with espionage activities on one hand, and also its diplomacy with other nations such as Russia and China on the other?
Yeah, this phenomenon, we can call it sharp power. We know what hard power is, guns and bombs, and soft power is leadership and setting an example. But sharp power is manipulation, and that's what's going on here. And MI5 and the counterintelligence agencies across the Western world are right to be concerned, but they have to strike a balance. On the one hand, they need access to Chinese markets, and they purchase a lot of Chinese goods, and a lot of foreign direct investment from China flows into these countries, and they don't want to upset that particular apple cart. On the other hand, they don't want to leave themselves vulnerable to this kind of hybrid warfare, this espionage, this new form of espionage and manipulation, sharp power. So it is about striking a balance. The case against these two people in the UK was kind of weak, but on the other hand, the Starmer government really stepped in and put its thumb on the scales of justice, as it were, in order to not irritate the Chinese unduly. And I think we can debate whether he struck the right balance or the wrong balance, but clearly governments in the Western world have to find some way of navigating these tensions.
All right, sir, requesting you to stay on with us as we are in fact tracking some further updates. Air France has now announced that it will extend the suspension of its flights to Madagascar through Friday due to ongoing unrest in the country. The French airline has emphasized that the resumption of operations will depend on daily assessments of the situation on the ground. This decision comes amid escalating political turmoil in Madagascar, where President Andry Rajoelina recently dissolved the National Assembly. This move was made to stop an oncoming opposition vote trying to remove him from office during protests which are underway. However, opposition leaders have condemned the dissolution and called it legally invalid, highlighting that they were not consulted on the president's decree. This, interestingly, is also taking place as Rajoelina is claiming that a coup is underway. An elite branch of Madagascar's military, CAPSAT, has now declared that it has control over the military, with some soldiers joining the protests as well. And there are also some claims that the opposition in the meantime is making that Rajoelina has fled the country. This is a claim that he has been denying. Interestingly, the opposition leaders are also claiming that it was a French aircraft that was used, in fact, to evacuate Rajoelina from Madagascar. This has now been denied by French President Emmanuel Macron as well. With us on the broadcast is Mr. Andrew Latham, Professor Andrew Latham. Interesting developments, a lot of fast-paced developments coming in from Madagascar. We've seen these protests had cropped up late last month, and since then they have completely escalated. They have exploded to such a point where Rajoelina now claims that there's been an assassination attempt against him as well. What do you make of what's happening on the ground and the claims that the opposition is making with regards to France?
Yeah, well, I think we can look at the French ending air traffic to Madagascar as kind of early warning sign that things really are not going well on the ground there. Madagascar's airspace hasn't been closed. There hasn't been any kind of policy that's a blanket policy regarding all airlines. But the fact that this airline, which is an important airline for Madagascar, has said no more flights is really, the alarm bells ought to be going off around the world. Markets will be affected next. It's not clear how this is going to end up on the ground. Clearly, the forces, the anti-government forces are building, and the fact that they have co-opted perhaps elements of the military is an important sign as well. It may all fizzle out, but I rather suspect that we're on the verge of some momentous changes in Madagascar, and this pronouncement on the part of Air France is merely the first kind of warning bell for the broader global community.
And speaking of Madagascar in itself, if the coup that Rajoelina claims does take place, what sort of implications does it have for the people over there?
Well, in the short term, it's going to be more turmoil and more economic dislocation. In the medium to long term, perhaps a more stable government that's more democratically oriented will coalesce and crystallize. It's a very open-ended question at the moment, though. It's not clear exactly how these various disparate social forces will come together. If they do displace the current regime, what will come next? It may be much more democratic, maybe much more oriented towards free markets, maybe more oriented towards being part of the global community. But it may evolve in a quite different direction, which is not going to be to the benefit of the people of Madagascar.
All right, sir, with that, I would like to thank you for taking out time sharing your perspective on these very crucial developments with us. More news coming in from Europe. The European Union has hit luxury fashion giants Gucci, Chloe and Loewe with hefty fines totaling more than 157 million euros or roughly 182 million US dollars. The European Commission maintains that these brands have violated competition laws by restricting how independent third-party retailers can set their own prices, both online as well as offline. Essentially, these fashion houses limited the freedom of their retailers to decide prices, which undermines fair competition in the market. The fines come as part of the EU's broader efforts to enforce fair trade practices and crack down on price fixing in various industries, including luxury goods. Now, Gucci-owned Kering had said that the EU probe was resolved following a cooperation procedure with the brand, and the financial hit was provisioned in the group's 2025 first half results as well. Meanwhile, Richemont, which owns Chloe, and LVMH, the owner of Loewe, did not immediately reply to a request for any comment. Shifting focus to more developments coming in. Post the Gaza Peace Summit that took place in Egypt, President of European Council Antonio Costa has praised the peace plan and international efforts towards a ceasefire. He's also called for a two-state solution for lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians. The leader has stated that the European Union is committed to supporting the plan's implementation, including transitional governance and recovery, as well as reconstruction. Now, according to him, the EU will increase humanitarian aid to Palestinians and continue supporting the Palestinian Authority's reform agenda to ensure that Gaza becomes part of a democratic, terrorism-free state. The EU has also promised to help stabilize Gaza through missions focused on broader security, capacity building, and police training as well. Meanwhile, in related news, the Israeli Defense Forces have identified the bodies of 4 hostages who had died in Hamas's captivity, which were then returned, and have notified their families as well. Now, 2 of the deceased have been identified as Guy Illouz and Bipin Joshi. They were kidnapped on the 7th of October in 2023 and died during captivity. Hamas has further revealed the names of the other 2 bodies, claiming them to be the remains of an IDF officer and captain as well. Although the families of these two victims have requested anonymity and to not publicly identify their bodies. This is, of course, the latest that we are tracking. Remember, the Gaza Declaration was signed yesterday by the United States, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey. All four parties were on the dais together in Egypt, where they had signed this very, very crucial declaration that has resulted now in the hostage prisoner swap that has taken place. But now we're getting a statement from European Council President Antonio Costa, who has praised the peace plan and international efforts towards a ceasefire, and has also called for a two-state solution for lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians. He has stated that the European Union is committed to supporting the plan's implementation, including transitional governance, recovery, and reconstruction. Now, according to him, the EU will increase humanitarian aid to Palestinians and continue supporting the Palestinian Authority's reform agenda to ensure that Gaza becomes part of a democratic, terrorism-free state as well. The EU, meanwhile, has promised to help stabilize Gaza through missions focused on broader security, capacity building, and police training as well. Meanwhile, earlier in the day, we do remember statements from prominent European leaders such as Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, who've hailed what we witnessed in Egypt yesterday as a historic moment for the entirety of the Middle East. The aim of the summit yesterday itself was to bring an end to the war and ensure lasting peace and stability in the Middle East. Donald Trump, in the meantime, has been formally endorsed by Israel for the Nobel Peace Prize, the 2026 edition of the same. With that, viewers, it's a wrap on NewsX Eurozone.